Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Blanc Township Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, August 11th. And I'd like to have us rise and pledge allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, would like to call the meeting to order and ask if there's an approval for this evening's agenda. And you need to unmute yourself if you want to speak. Go ahead, Ms. Lane.
Chair, I would move approval of tonight's agenda, including the August 13th agenda.
Okay. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have a question
Sure.
about the consent agenda part of it.
For Thursday evening?
The extravaganza.
Okay, for Thursday evening? Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Massey. Your concern regarding the consent agenda.
Okay, Mr. Chair, my question is that
We're having trouble hearing you, Mr. Massey.
something that's happening to your voice.
Yeah, we can't hear you very well, but try it again. What's your concern with regard to the consent agenda for Thursday?
Okay, B.
Okay.
That amount 58,000 for the tools. What are those tools used for? Is that in the budget?
Actually, I think you're looking at an old agenda. We actually moved that to the regular agenda.
Oh, you did?
Yes. So we have that in the regular agenda.
This is the latest agenda that I have.
Okay. All right. That one, actually, that item, we'll go over that in the agenda for Thursday, but that's in the regular agenda. We moved that out of the consent agenda. I think we had it in there for a day and switched
So
out.
how many items in the consent agenda?
The only item in the consent agenda for Thursday, two of them. One is the treasurer's financial recap, and the other is an approval of a permit for a resident to do some work at the cemetery on McFarland Cemetery with regard to the historic committee.
Okay, I support.
Okay. All right, so there's been a motion and support. Any further discussion? Ms. Lane, if you want to call the roll, and I'll ask everyone to unmute themselves for the vote.
Okay. Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Buzak?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And I am assuming I don't see Mr. Thomas. Is he absent, sir?
I do not see him either. We don't see him in the waiting room either to join. So
Right.
we'll
I just wanted to make sure so that I had the correct.
Yep, we'll keep an eye out for him in case he joins. Okay, we're going to ask that anybody who would like to make a public comment, there is a feature where you can actually raise your hand, and we've got Robbie Beller here to actually unmute you if you do raise your hand. So I would ask that any of our attendees, that would like to make a citizen comment, that you raise your hand and we will unmute you to be able to speak. You might try scrolling up on the Okay, we don't, I don't know. If anybody would like to speak, though, we need you to raise your hand on the app. Okay. Seeing no hands raised, we're going to move on with the agenda. The first item on the agenda is to review.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I don't see the raise your hand
Okay.
symbol.
Okay.
I'm not sure if any of the other residents that are online might also
Okay.
have that problem.
Did you have public comment? I believe that's Mr. Yancho.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mike Yancho Senior, 10640 Halsey Road, Grand Blanc, Michigan.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Yancho.
So I found the township website this week to be a little bit confusing regarding what is exactly on tonight's agenda. Um, is it solely for the compensation and organization for the supervisor and deputy supervisor? Or is there more on the agenda tonight than those items?
Yes, actually, we're going to try and make this a little bit simpler for our next meeting. But if you go to our township website and go to the calendar, and anybody can do this, if you go to the calendar and click on the particular day of the meeting that you're looking for, you can click on that date, and any meetings for that day will have the agenda and actually the meeting packet. What was confusing, and I understand, Mr. Yancho, I didn't notice it till late, and I received another phone call prior to the meeting, but the meeting announcement in terms of the actual formal announcement had a duplication of information. So we did have a task force meeting yesterday, a special meeting, and since there were more than 3 board members, we had to make it public. That information, unfortunately, was also on the meeting notice for this evening's meeting instead of it showing committee of the whole. But if you actually go to our website, the actual agenda for this evening is on there as well as the packet. So I apologize for that meeting notice. And I think a part of the issue was we had a few people on vacation last week and a little bit of confusion. So we'll get with Ms. Lane and Mr. Beller, and we'll make sure that that's cleared up for Thursdays and make it much more understandable to the public. So thank you.
I'm sure with the election last week and the COVID considerations that the board and the office is taking, that's a reasonable explanation. But I do have some comments regarding the agenda tonight.
Okay.
And that's in regard to the description and responsibilities of the deputy supervisor and the supervisor.
Okay.
Those duties together encompass the same as the superintendent's job description. Those people should share in that responsibility and partnership for those items that the superintendent was previously handling. And I have great faith in both you and the chief to carry out those things. You have the experience and the expertise to carry out those duties. And also in regard to the compensation, I know that taking on those additional duties will put lots of other things on your plate. It'll take away from your family time and time with your friends, especially in this COVID time. But more than that, these duties will affect your health and your sleep because they are big responsibilities. And so I hope that the search for a new superintendent will be coming along soon. And if it is not soon, then our board can revisit decision and make some changes. I don't think we have to be hasty in making a decision at this time. Those options will always be open to us.
Thank you, Mr. Yancho.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't know. Does anybody else have their hand up? I don't know. Is it possible to unmute everybody and just see if there's anybody, and then we mute everybody? Okay. Okay. Maria Hobson. You're on mute.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Maria Hobson, 8389 Parkside Drive. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Yancho about getting moving on this superintendent quickly. I have zero faith in the existing trustees and would really rather not have them as a part of the decision making going forward. They already fired a superb superintendent. Stop laughing at me, Mr. Atkins. Not funny. You guys are so disrespectful, it's unbelievable. Mr. Massey calls names to everybody. Mr. Atkins, you're laughing at me. I'm a resident of this community, and I don't deserve that from you. So you trustees are the most disrespectful people. I'm sick and tired of listening to Mr. Massey bad-mouthing every board before this. Those are some good people, good men and women who have served on these boards, and you have nothing but disrespect for the entire community other than the four of you. So yes, I have zero confidence in you, any of you. So please do this community a favor and don't vote. Just pass it on until the next board. I have confidence in every one of those people on the ballot, and I've done my homework. That's all for me for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beller, anybody else? Okay. See no other individuals that would like to make a public comment. We'll move on now. We'll try and also make note if we can identify to people how they raise their hand, just so that's not clear in the that's not clear in the meeting notice. We need to put that in there. Okay, moving on to Thursday's agenda. We will have an approval of the minutes, and there's a slew of them there, so board members will take a look at that. We'll have the treasurer's report. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mansour. Go ahead and mute.
So I think in the packet we got copies of all the minutes that we're supposed to have in there, except the July 28th ones, the regular board. I don't know if those are. I didn't see those in my packet. I don't know if those are going to be included by the time we get to Thursday.
They
Okay.
were put.
Robbie, we can check on that.
There.
Okay. We will check on that, and we'll update the packet. If they're not in there, Mr. Mansour, we will make sure they're in there.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for catching that. We will have on the consent agenda the approval of the treasurer's financial for $1,318,000, $859.85. We will also have in there, the board will consider a motion to approve a permit from Ms. Popoff of the Historic Committee for the use of Perry McFarland Cemetery on Sunday, August 30th, and it's to teach some restoration techniques for cemetery markers. Something that we have to approve if anybody's going to be on our facility holding an event. Mr. Massey, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Question.
Go ahead.
Are we spending money on this project?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Under operational issues, the board will consider a motion to approve the police command and sergeant's labor contracts. Just for the public's information, we have forwarded clean copies of these to the board members, and our labor attorney, Aaron Graves, is prepared to join us on Thursday evening, and we can do that. If we need to go into closed session, we can do it then. Otherwise, the board can take action. But you should have, all the board members should have updated copies of those contracts. Mr. Massey?
Only question I have, Mr. Chair, as all of those errors, incorrect markings, have they been corrected, all of them?
I sent it out earlier today to all of you, so I have not had a chance to go through all of them, but Attorney Graves makes note of which ones he has changed and which ones were agreed to. I know Mr. Guzak had made some suggestions as well as some others, and so take a look at the emails and you'll see what things were changed and which, so take a look at it, and if we need to go on executive session after you look at it, we can do that on Thursday, and you'll see the changes, okay? Item B, we have been requested to talk about the water rate study, and we do have Mr. Potter and Mr. Sears. If we can bring them into the meeting, we can discuss the water rate study and where that has taken us. So while we bring them into the meeting. So Mr. Sears, Mr. Potter, the water rate study, how often is it that we actually, is there a requirement that a water rate study be done on a periodic basis, or what is the requirement for that, or what is the trigger for having a water rate study to begin with, is one question I'd like to ask out of the blocks.
Typically, we have a water rate study every 5 years, and then we annually review it based on the budget process to see where we stand with the recommendations of the rate study.
Okay. So we hired Reftelis, which is, from what I understand, a very well-known organization that does these rate studies throughout the U.S. And over the past, 6-8 months, they conducted this rate study, correct?
Correct, yes. They are one of the premier firms in doing rate studies throughout the nation. And we have pretty much completed it, but as we all know, the assumptions that we started under are no longer valid. So Jeff and my recommendation at this point is that we put the Reftelis study on hold. We have no rating increases for 2021 until we see what the impacts of COVID are.
Yeah. Maybe if we could just back up, and I want to introduce for the public, we have Dan Potter, who's our consultant engineer for our water department, and we have Jeff Sears, our director of DPW, joining us. But if you could kind of tell us a little bit about what goes into a rate study and what is the purpose of it, and just kind of give us an overview, especially for the public, and it's been a while since we've discussed this. So what is the rate study all about, and why do one? And what information is taken into regard to the rate study?
Well, essentially what we look at is the entire cost of service for both the water system and the sanitary sewer system, capital improvement programs, ongoing maintenance. Taking all those things into consideration, we look at what rate structure is required to support those activities for the next 5 years.
Okay. So the assumptions you're talking about are assumptions with what's going to go on in the economy as far as growth or decline, what have you.
Correct. Water usage patterns, sewer usage patterns, home starts, commercial starts, all those kind of economic factors are analyzed in order to try to put a sense of what the rate should be over the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So, part of what plays into our rates, obviously, is the county, because we buy, we're a wholesale customer for water from the county, and we also pay them for our sewerage. How do we guesstimate, what their numbers are going to be and figure those into our rate study?
The discussions that I've had with the county this year, we don't anticipate a water increase for 2021. There probably will be some type of sewer increase in 21 or 22. They're still in the process of finalizing their rate study, but they're in the same situation that we are with COVID and all of these things going on. It's difficult to anticipate what's going on. But I anticipate that we don't have any water increases for 2021 from the county, and possibly a sewer increase in 21 or 22.
Okay. So with regard to rate increases, when is the last rate increase that the township residents saw with regard to water rate? I know there's, part of the confusion is that there's several different terms. There's ready to serve, the meter, factors into that as far as what size meter you have, the water usage. Maybe you can talk briefly about those couple of different charges, so we clear up any confusion right from the beginning.
Our last, I can take that. Our last water increase that we had was in early 2019 with the last budget. We also switched to what Scott's referring to as the equivalent meter system. So basically what that does is everybody has an RTS fee on their bill, and that fee is based on the size of your meter, which determines your demand on the water system and how much demand you require for your property. We did do a small waterway increase in 2019. I think it was 2% or less across the board. But basically what goes into that is year after year, whenever we are in budget preparation season, we look at all of our usage from the past, and we kind of have to predict on what we're going to see in the next year, and that's what we base our water rates on. Now, we have the water rate study that is mostly complete, as Dan indicated, and we will be able to use that as a really good tool to help us set those rates moving forward.
Okay. I saw Mr. Massey had his hand up. Mr. Massey?
I was saying that at times when they're speaking, the voices are not coming through clearly.
I think it might be your connection, because you were breaking up earlier. I don't know if anybody else had any problem hearing Mr. Potter or Mr. Sears, but I could hear them fine. I don't know. I think you might have an issue with your connection, Mr. Massey.
Oh,
I don't know if your Wi-Fi or what, but Mr. Mansour?
Yes, thank you. We've had this discussion about the rate study, I think, numerous times in the last 6 or 8 months. And one of the requests that was made early on is to get a copy of the first rate study and with its assumptions, and then get, kind of fast forward to where we are today. So is there a reason that we can't get that, in the next couple of days?
Mr. Potter, we sent out something.
Yeah, 2 months ago.
Did you?
All the board. Yes.
Both versions?
2 months ago.
I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can resend it if you want. And
Yes. We can resize it.
Yeah, that would be great.
if we can resend it,
Thank
that'd
you.
be good.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions for, let's see here, get rid of. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Sears or Mr. Potter? We'll get the rate study out that was sent out, and again, the assumptions, and I'm not a professional in this field, but from what I gather, the assumptions factor in quite a bit from what I'm hearing both here and at the county in terms of projected growth or slowing down. Right now, everything is kind of a big question mark. So, all right. Well, we'll look forward to taking a look at that, and maybe we can discuss some more on Thursday after everybody has a chance to take another look at that. Thank you, Mr. Sears and Mr. Potter.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the board will consider a resolution on a proposed total authorized levy of 6.8738 mils for tax year 2020 comprised of, and then we have a list of the various millages. I'll go through them so they're on the video, but it's 4.4844 mils for township operating, 0.9960 mils for extra voted police, 0.1546 mils for extra voted mosquito, 0.9934 mils for extra voted fire, 0.2454 mils for extra voted parks and recreation. Ms. Salvati is not available this evening, but what we have to do with this, or what we need to do, is if this is approved tonight, what happens is we have a public meeting in September that we schedule, and then we can go through all these then and give the details. Am I correct, Mr. Laddie, on that I see him shaking his head. So that's kind of where we stand with this. We approve it tonight. And that allows us to schedule a meeting, a public meeting in September, where we can answer any questions, and we publish it as well. And that's why we need to approve it tonight, because we need to publish it for the public to have a public hearing. Mr. Massey?
Wait, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we do this once a year, right?
Yes. Yep. I'm sorry. Mr. Laddie had his hand up, and then we'll get to you, Mr. Guzek.
Mr. Chair, you mean approve it Thursday night?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Thursday night. And then we will schedule, we'll be able to schedule and advertise for the September meeting. Mr. Guzek?
Yeah, that's what it was. I think I was just pointing out that you were thinking Thursday and not tonight. That's
Right.
all.
Yep.
Same thing Mr. Laddie was.
Yep, anything on here, we'll be taking action on Thursday. So,
Right.
So thanks for clarifying that. So we'll cover that. We'll take care of that on Thursday, and then we'll schedule a public hearing for September to go over the details of this. And I'm sure Ms. Salvati will make herself available if anybody has any question between now and then as well. Item D, under operational issues, the board will consider a motion to approve a payment of $14,069 to ETNA Supply for the annual census R&I meter reading system hosting fee. And there's details on that in the packet. It's equipment that our DPW uses. Item E, the board will consider resolution.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
can we hear from Director Sears?
sure. Mr. Sears,
Can you hear, Mr. Chair?
yes, Mr. Sears is on lead. You want to tell us a little bit about this? I think is what Mr.
Sure. Yeah, that's not a problem. What is before you tonight is the annual renewal of our R&I system. Basically, that is the brains of our meter reading system. It's a fixed base system which allows us to read all the water meters in the township from Township Hall. Just a few years ago, whenever I started in Grand Blanc Township, we used to have to send somebody around the township to read the meters. So having this equipment has definitely saved us a lot of labor, time, and hassle altogether. So this is an annual fee that we pay basically so that Census Analytics hosts all of our data, and this is for the maintenance for the system also.
Mr. Massey, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Sears, I have a question.
Sure.
How often do we check our system? Let me use the old word for calibration, to make sure that it's reading accurately.
Well, it's updated all the time. Like I said, this pays for the maintenance of the system. So all of our pieces of equipment out in the field have alarms on them, and if there's anything going on with them, it alerts us via email. It alerts us. It also alerts Aetna Supply and Census, so they all know whenever something is going haywire with the system. The meters themselves, we take care of those as they fail. Basically, I'm not sure if you're referring to how we read the meters or meter usage.
Well, I'm referring to when I receive my bill, can I assure that that's accurate?
Absolutely, yeah. This system just collects the data from the meters themselves. And the meters are positive displacement meters, which means as the water moves through them, it reads the water usage, and then there's a box on the outside of your house that collects that data from the meter itself and sends it into Township Hall. So yeah, you can rest assured that it is an accurate read. And more than likely, whenever we get complaints about that, Mr. Massey, and we investigate them, what we can do is we can test the meters individually, and every time we've ever tested the meter, it has been in our favor, which means the older meters slow down after a certain amount of time, and they're not reading as much usage as they should be.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Mansour? Go ahead and unmute your line, Mr. Mansour.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, if I could, Director Sears, two questions on this. First, how long have we been using this system to collect the readings?
This system has been phased in over the past 5 years.
Okay. And what kind of labor savings? I mean, obviously, you don't have to send people out to every residence every month or 2 months or whatever. How much did that save us?
If I had to estimate for you, I would say that we have saved at least $20,000 a year, just based on the equipment that we used to have to buy to read the meters, fuel savings and labor savings. I would say at least $20,000 a year.
Okay. We didn't probably reduce our labor amount of people though, right?
Well, we have. Over the past few years, we haven't had to replace some employees.
Okay. And then last question on this, is this a payment about a carryover or is it about the same or up or down? Or I mean, is it much of an increase versus last time? Or
it represents about a 3% increase from last year.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Sears, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the other factors with regard to this remote meter reading is convenience for, let's say that someone is selling their home and they need a final read. We're able to get that without having to send somebody out in the field, right?
Correct, yeah. It used to be we'd have to compile a list of those and then send somebody to read those meters, generally on the date that they're going to close. Now it can be done because it collects the data and saves it. So whenever we read the meters every month, we get 30 days worth of data. We can pull the data from the exact day. We can pull data from the exact minute if we wanted to.
It also helps with issues that people are claiming that they're having large usage or something, and we can actually go in and take a look at that and see if there's an issue.
Right. We can pinpoint leaks when they stopped or when they started, when they stopped. We can give people time frames of when they're using the most water, and it really does help people narrow down when they're having issues, and they can fix them quickly generally.
So whether it's a lawn sprinkler system that has gone haywire, you can notice that, hey, the same time that their water usage jumped through the sky is the same day that they turn down their irrigation system, or they could have a leaky toilet that was running while they're on vacation for a week. So it works for several different things. Okay, thank you, Mr. Sears. I take him off the video now. The next item, item E, the board will consider a resolution to add 21 streetlights to our standard lighting contract with Consumers Energy and authorize Township Supervisor to execute all related contracts and agreements. This is for the Dort extension project that I'm not sure that all 21 will be installed immediately, but anyways, that's for that project. Anybody have any questions on that? Mr. Mansour?
So so I saw the notes here. Is there some estimate that we have about what the cost of this is going to be, and what budget or account would we consider bringing this paying for it?
Mm-hmm. Well, in some cases, we'll bring Mr. Sears on because he's more familiar with this, but if this were in a residential area, we would create a lighting district for the residents in that particular area to make, pay the cost on their annual taxes. Mr. Sears, any idea on what the cost will be annual for the township for these lights?
Unfortunately, I don't have the cost for this one. Generally, whenever Consumers Energy sends me these contracts, there's a line on them that says this is what your estimated energy usage is, and this one did not have that. I can tell you these are LED lights. I can probably request that information from Consumers, and they could probably give it to me. I'm not sure they can get it by Thursday night, but I can get you the account number that will more than likely come out.
So
by Thursday night.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Mansour.
And just one more thing. So you're talking about the annual cost. LED lights, you're right, can't cost that much. I guess I was mostly concerned about the initial cost.
Oh, okay. There are no initial costs to the township. Township. The road
Okay.
commission is paying the entire installation cost.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. With regard to next item, the board will consider a motion for approval to authorize the purchase of the Hearst extrication tools in the amount of $58,000 and for the supervisor to sign all purchasing and warranty contracts. We have Chief Burdett on, and bring him on camera. Good afternoon, or good evening, Chief Burdett.
Good evening. How is everyone?
Good. If you can tell us a little bit about the extrication tools and why we need them,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Sure. I'm requesting the approval to purchase two sets of electric or hydraulic extrication tools, which consist of a set of spreaders, what we call rams, which give us greater width to open car doors up or even doors in homes, and cutters also for $58,000 through the Hearst Corporation. These are replacement units to units we already have. We already have one set, which is battery operated, which is the hydraulic, and the other set is a hydraulic system, which uses hoses, creates trips hazards and incidents and so on. This was approved in this year's capital purchasing budget. I feel that it's essential that we get that into to be for approval to purchase it for this year.
Mr. Massey, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Chief Burnett,
Yes,
how are you today, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I have a tough question for you.
Okay.
Does this enhance the old technology that you used to use in case of a burning vehicle, etc.?
Well, it does, Mr. Massey. What these systems do, years ago when these systems were first invented, they were all hydraulic, meaning you had hoses that were hooked up to pumps and portable power units and so on. Today's technology uses what's called hydraulics, or they're battery-operated hydraulic systems. You don't have the cord, so you don't have trip hazards. They're more versatile to use. We're using them more on just anywhere we need to pry something open, where before it was always a manual system. We'll use the hydraulic system to open up the car doors and so on. So yes, it does enhance our operations and makes it safer for us to operate.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Mansour, and then Mr. Guzak. Mr. Mansour?
Yep, thank you. Chief, to you again, please. I didn't see any information in the packet on these on the purchase of this. Did we competitively bid this, or do we have a single source justification for it?
I submitted in the packet. You should have a letter. There were two companies that bid this system. One is Hearst, and the other one is TNT Manufacturing. The firefighters themselves demonstrated these tools, and they agreed that the Hearst is a far better system. Hearst is what we've had before, so they've been in the industry, I believe, about 45 years now. So they have a lot of technology advance over other competitors. TNT was a good system. They were the cheaper system. I will agree to that. But as far as in a head-to-head competition, the Hearst outshined them as far as advances in technology and allowing us to do one-cut operations where the tool doesn't move while we're trying to cut. You kind of picture it as the cutters are scissors, and the one manufacturer uses just a plain set of blades to it, and when you cut, the tool actually moves with the metal. Hearst has designed a different type of blade that when you cut, it grasps the metal and cuts it easily, and it doesn't move at all. So it makes it a lot safer to use. So there was commitment.
And then last question is, what warranty period is included with these?
This is the 10-year warranty on a unit. It's a 2-year bumper-to-bumper warranty on it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Guzak? You need to unmute yourself, Mr. Guzak.
System, it went blank. I can't find my unmute button. The screen's gone, but
Okay. We can hear you. We can hear you.
okay. Well, basically, I did see it in the pack. You know, we had 2 ones, and I know that the firefighters picked this one, and I wanted some of the reasons of why. And of course, you explained all that. And that was my question: is, you know, how was it better? And hearing your explanation, that's all I wanted to hear. So I appreciate you describing the differences.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions for Chief Burdett on the tools that are on the agenda? Okay. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
The next item, G, the board will consider compensation for the deputy supervisor and supervisor for additional responsibilities. We did have a task force meeting yesterday, and Ms. Lane, Mr. Guzak, myself were present. I know a number of you were attending the meeting as well. I've spoken with Mr. Laddie. There were some updates that the task force would entertain adding to the agreement, or the job description, I should say, for the deputy supervisor, and that was that one of the things that they would like to include at the beginning is that these responsibilities are in my absence, that the chief would have these responsibilities would be in my absence. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I would like to ask Chief Wiles a question.
Okay. Well, let me go through these things, these set of changes the task force has asked, and then we'll see if is Chief on? Okay, we'll bring him on in just a few minutes. If you want to go ahead and bring him on. So the first thing that I mentioned that the task force wanted was that in my absence, these responsibilities would go into play. Also, that any additional pay for the chief or myself, it was brought up that one of the members likes to make sure that ends November 30th. And then also there's some discussion on the severance pay that the task force didn't want to do a year worth of severance pay. I brought up to the board that, to the task force that was my request, just to protect the chief, and that wasn't his. So I said that we would get some input from his chief on there. All right. Good evening, Chief. Mr. Massey sounds like he has a question for you. Mr. Massey?
Absolutely.
Yes, my question to the chief is, how do you interpret that clause in your contract where you should not have take on extra duties?
I take that clause as my commitment is to the township, and any outside employment outside of the township would be in violation of that clause. So duties within the township, serving the township, my belief is they would comply with that clause.
What Mr. Massey is referring to is in the employment contract for the police chief, one of the items, item 10, and I'll just read it. I went over it with Mr. Laddie earlier today, as that was a point of discussion also for the task force. And it's number 10. We'll wait till Mr. Guzak has his computer working. One of the concerns, I know that you hear us okay now, Mr. Guzak?
Yes, I always heard you. Thank you. I was just trying to get my screen back, and I have it back now.
Okay.
Thank you.
One of the concerns Mr. Massey asked Chief Wiles about was with regard to his employment contract and whether or not the clause number 10, I'll read it so that everyone can make sure we're on the same page, but it states, Chief to devote full time to township is the header. The chief will devote full-time attention and energies to the business of the township, and during this employment will not engage in other business activity, regardless of whether such activity is pursued for profit, gain, or other pecuniary advantage that is directly related to the township's business while he is employed with the township. I'd like to have Mr. Laddie talk just briefly about that, because I know we discussed it a couple nights ago.
And Supervisor Bennett, you read that correctly. It's an interesting clause in the contract, and I can't remember where it came from. And I wish it was written a little differently so that we wouldn't be looking at it with any amount of confusion as far as what that means. I think there's two ways to look at it. First of all, you could read it the way that the chief has and the way Supervisor Bennett has by saying that it pertains, it guarantees that whatever activity the chief is engaged in, if it benefits the township, then that's permitted. And anything that does not directly benefit the township or is related to township business, it is not acceptable under that agreement. The other way to look at it, and again, it's just because it's so oddly written, the terms, the fact that it refers to the existing contract by talking about this employment, will not engage in any other business activity, and I'm paraphrasing, that is directly related to the township's business while he's employed with the township, makes it, brings into doubt exactly what that means. And by bringing it into doubt, I don't mean that, I mean, it is perfectly reasonable to interpret it the way that the chief and Roger Bennett are interpreting it. It's also, I think, reasonable to say, I don't know, it seems to me in the context of the contract that he'd be devoting all of his time and attention to his duties as the chief. But as far as this language goes, and it's written in English, obviously, but it's written poorly in English. I think each individual board member needs to take a look at that and decide whether or not there's a potential conflict with Chief Wiles engaging in duties only in Supervisor Bennett's absence. And if you all take a look at that and you say, well, it's not exactly clear to me, and then when I consider the duties that the chief may be engaged in, I don't necessarily know if it's going to impact his chief duties or not. And I would think that would be a pretty big concern of yours, right? To figure out whether or not these new duties in the absence of Supervisor Bennett are going to negatively impact the chief's performance as a chief, because obviously his first responsibility is to the police department, and any other responsibility would be to the township board. So unfortunately, I'm going to turn it back to the board members to see how they interpret that paragraph. But also, I want you to think about what the net effect of that would be. Let's say you're on the fence about it and not sure. I think the second step in the analysis is to say, well, what will be the downside if the chief engages in these activities in the supervisor's absence? And then that, I think, is a topic that you need to figure out or you need to discuss moving forward. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to comment. But again, it's there for you to take a look at and there for you to interpret.
Just one more interpretation that I see, David, is that will not engage in any other business activity, regardless of whether such activity is pursued for profit, gain, or other pecuniary advantage that is directly related to the township business. So what I'm reading that also as, or could read it as, it's very strangely written, but is that if it's for a supplier, let's say, that does business with the township, because that's directly related to the township's business too. So I believe it could be forbidding those types of relationships too, more than I see it.
I believe that however you read the sort of net effect of that, I think that the primary intent was certainly to not have a conflict of interest between some outside interest and the township, and that I think that is fairly obvious in its intent.
Mr. Massey?
Yes. My concern is interpreting it differently than the chair and the chief Wise are. Let me give you an example of something. Chief Wise is on township business. There's a shooting in the township. Someone has been shot. The police department is engaging in a shootout. Someone maybe have fatally been shot. So what does the police chief do at that point? And it's quite obvious that they're going to call the police chief now. So what does he do at that point?
And sometimes they would text me as well. and say, hey, we have a situation going on that we wanted to make you aware of, Supervisor Bennett.
No, I didn't ask the question. What would the chief do at that point? Will he say, you know how the chief always informed the board of activities that have taken place within the police department? So how would the chief behave in that situation, in that scenario?
Chief, any thoughts? I mean, I'm not sure how it's different than any other time, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm clear on the question, Trustee Massey, but I can guarantee you with any significant event in the township, just like I have always done as the police chief, I would forward you the board members that information when time allows after that scene is settled and under control. Whether it's a shooting, a fatal car crash, whatever the case may be, certainly notification of the board of those occurrences is important.
Okay.
But you wouldn't. I guess my question, since you answered it in such a different way than my question, so how could you be involved in the activities that had taken place and you was handling township business and there's a big lawsuit? So how could you defend your department and you was doing something else?
I'm not following the question, but.
I'm not sure I am, but even.
Okay, let me ask it a different way, Chief.
Sure.
Can you understand it this way? Okay, somebody got shot, big shootout. Black Lives Matter. You got a big shootout, so you are on township business. So it's all in the paper. The chief was not at his duties at the police station. He was on township business down in Detroit.
That can happen with the chief now. I mean, he goes to various meetings around the state as police chief. So, and I don't really see him going out of town for the deputy supervisor position. But he goes out of town now, and he has, that's why we're looking at the command staff contract. But he has command staff. But Chief, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think you hit on an interesting point. I think it's important to remember that the deputy supervisor role is only in the absence of the supervisor. And me going to out of town meetings as the deputy supervisor, I would think would be very minor or infrequent. In fact, it hasn't happened to date in the month we've been doing it. Obviously, if we have any sort of a shooting, like you mentioned, Mr. Massey, I get notified right away as the police chief. And then I'm going to that scene to make sure that the police department's policies, procedures are followed and that it's investigated properly. And then, of course, notifying whether it's Supervisor Bennett or the board after that is settled. I'm still not 100% clear on your question as far as what would change there. I don't see anything changing there. Regardless if Supervisor Bennett was on a day off and I was, filling in from there or what the case may be, I don't see a difference in how I would handle that situation.
I think you answered it based on my question.
Okay.
I'm not going to repeat your answer, but you answered it according to my question.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Massey. Did I cover all of the concerns, Ms. Lane, Mr. Guzak, that with regard to the agreement? Ms. Lane, can you unmute yourself?
For the public that's listening, the reason we ended the contract that we'll be discussing on Thursday, on November 30th, is to allow the new board members that are elected on November 3rd to make any future decisions that they want to make and not be held to any decisions that this board makes.
So the one question that came up was with regard to compensation, and that's the board's decision. I know I forget who it was that asked me about executive session. I'm not sure who it was. If that was Mr. Guzak or who it was. Go ahead, Mr. Guzak.
Yeah, normally when we talk about contracts and compensation, we always go into executive session to review it and get all the pros and cons so that we can get a clear decision on what's happening.
Yeah, I would refer that to Mr. Laddie to ask how that's handled. I don't know about, township board members and pay and doing that in executive session, but, certainly we do that.
How is that any different?
I don't know. I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer.
Well, so normally what we do when we are entering into a contract, and even an employment contract, we usually don't like to do our negotiations or discuss our offers in front of our potential employee or in front of the person that we're doing business with, right? Because we don't want to. We may, in a process of negotiation, there may be give and take. We may have a strategy. And so oftentimes we will go into executive session to talk about the terms or specifically the strategy of negotiation. And we do that very often with commenting and seeking advice regarding a written attorney opinion. I did write a written attorney opinion about this topic to you, I think at least 2 weeks ago, which I think allows you to go into executive session if you want to. This situation's a little bit different, and I'll tell you why. It's in the case of a deputy supervisor, the supervisor has the choice to name that deputy, and the statute says that the township board is exclusively in charge of compensation. And so you're not choosing your candidate; you're having your candidate chosen for you by the supervisor, and it's completely up to you as to whether or not you want to. What you want to pay that person, and whether it's completely up to you whether or not you want to add to the supervisor's compensation. So we've taken the elements, I think, of negotiation out, and it's squarely on your lap. If it is in fact true that Supervisor Bennett has offered Chief Wiles as his deputy, and you say, okay, well, I accept that, and now it's up to us to decide how much we want to pay him, if anything, and also do we want to pay Mr. Bennett any additional money? That isn't really going to be a matter of negotiation. Mr. Bennett can ask for something, and Chief Wiles can ask for something, but frankly, you're just going to make an offer, and it's going to be accepted or not. You can go into executive session if you want. You can get feedback from Chief Wiles and Supervisor Bennett if you want. That's an option, but this is a little different situation than we normally have.
Okay, Ms. Lane?
I hope I'm unmuted. Just as a reminder to the board, a deputy supervisor is similar to the deputy treasurer and the deputy clerk, and in both the cases that was taken, their wages were taken into executive session and done that way, even though Earl and I had the opportunity to choose the person. We negotiated and discussed what was going to be paid in executive session. So I wouldn't be opposed to discussing this in executive session with the board, because they're all three deputies chosen by individuals.
Well, if we choose to go into executive session, what I'd like to do is ask if we could do that on Thursday. We will have Aaron Graves with us to talk about if we need to go into executive session before we approve the police contracts. And I'm not prepared, technology-wise, to try and move everybody into a separate room tonight. So if that's the wish.
Agreeable. This is a Thursday night item, Mr.
Right.
Chair, just as we're trying to clarify things.
Yeah, but I just mean in terms of going into executive session,
Right.
I prefer that we did it on Thursday instead of tonight.
Absolutely.
If that's the choice of the board. Mr.
Absolutely.
Massey?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Mr. Massey, I saw your hand up.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to remind everyone that this similar discussion that Attorney Graves took up at our last meeting that he attended, the executive session question came up. And do you guys remember how he answered that? Almost verbatim, like Earl and the attorney Laddie. Okay, it's a little different situation, but basically it's the same.
All right, so I guess, I don't know, is the consensus that we want to wait till Thursday and do an executive session, or what's your choice on this?
It's a Thursday item, Mr. Chair.
Right, that's what I mean. You
Right.
want, so,
Yep, I'd go with the Thursday exact.
okay. I don't hear any objections, so we'll consider that unless on Thursday when we get to the agenda item, somebody has something else in mind.
So just for clarification.
We're going to talk about it on Thursday in executive session.
Okay, thank you.
Unless somebody has some change of mind and it's going to be on the agenda, but okay. Thank you, Chief Wiles. Letter H, the board will consider a resolution to approve the litigation policy. Well, go ahead, Mr. Laddie. You might want to just clarify if there's been any changes since the last time we reviewed this.
There have. What we did, we had a discussion about the proposed policy, and I was directed to take out any reference to the township superintendent and replace that with the township supervisor, which I have done. Also, regarding on page 2, the section of material information, there was a request to change the township supervisor. It was shall forward material information to the township attorney, who shall provide the board with a summary of information. To the township supervisor will forward material information. And I made that change. And then, as you'll see in the highlighted version, we had a discussion about how do we want to handle collective bargaining and labor matters, particularly if we've retained counsel for labor matters or collective bargaining agreements. What is the requirement for them to report to the board? And currently, it's written that counsel, whoever that may be, and the township supervisor shall be responsible for reporting to the board. And so we had a little bit of a question of what we're going to do on that topic. And we also did have a question. We had some discussion about material information, because I think while that is, I tried to word that as expressively as I could. My goal was to cause the reporting of things that had some level of possibility of resulting in litigation. And I'm going to give you an example. We had allegations that were made in a case. Well, it wasn't even a case, really. It was sort of framed as a lawsuit. But really, there were just a series of allegations that, if you read them, could lead a reasonable person to believe that it might lead to some litigation or some potential contested matter. And that was the idea of having that information reported. The idea was not to have everybody who says, my tax bill's wrong, I'm going to sue you, or I'm unhappy with such and such, and I'm going to sue you guys, or I'm going to file a complaint somewhere. That really wasn't what I intended to be included in material information. It really was more of kind of an objective, reasonable standard of whether or not, if you read this written information, would you feel that it is reasonably likely it could result in a contested matter or litigation. And so with those items left to be decided, everything else I think is ready to go.
Mr. Mansour.
Thank you, Attorney Laddie. You've sat with us now for a number of years and have seen the kind of trials we've gone through with things that kind of sneak up on us in executive sessions and other places. Based on your experience, is the verbiage in here related to material information? Would that have avoided the majority of those concerns where we thought that we were, kind of brought into this at the tail end?
The material information would have, I think it would have helped in the Marshall allegations, which I want to point out again, though, because I love saying this, that were just summarily dismissed by the court, and there was not a shred of finding of any sort of legitimacy to those complaints or to those allegations. It would have helped in that situation. The other parts, though, of the policy, and again, I know exactly what you're saying, because we seem to have had a innocent kind of disconnect between a flow of information from outside counsel to our department heads and to our board, and I think we've solved those, right? I mean, we've identified them and solved them, and I think this policy solves a lot of those. So I think the answer is we probably solve 95% of the historic problems that we've had. And again, I don't want to make it sound like it's been a huge deal. It's been maybe 3 or 4 items that we felt we could have found out about sooner. It didn't have any effect on how those matters were handled. And they were all handled successfully, by the way, in favor of the township. But I think this will solve most of that problem. The other thing is, and because you'll have a township supervisor and you have a township attorney, whoever those folks may be in the future, with you almost at every meeting, I think putting the obligation on those 2 positions is a good thing to do, particularly the township attorney, since again, if I send something to you with confidentiality and attorney-client privilege, it allows me a better expression of my thoughts on the matter. It also allows the allegations to not be necessarily made public when they shouldn't be, but gets you information quickly.
Just a couple of comments. I think, we have a history of reporting anything here at the township office immediately, at least since I've been supervisor, to Attorney Laddie and to the insurance company. I think part of the dilemma has been the insurance company and who they communicate back with. And if we get something, it goes immediately to our attorney. And so we've got to make sure that whoever our insurance company is knows who they need to be communicating directly with, and make sure we keep that in front of them. My concern, I spoke with Attorney Laddie earlier today, and my concern with the policy is that I guess, material information gives them some wiggle room, but what I would hate to get to the point of is that, for a large part of, I don't want to say that we're the complaint department, but people usually come to the township when they have an issue that needs solving. And typically we're in the solution business here, whether it's, and especially, for example, the police or building department or code enforcement. There's frequently times where we can't resolve, to the individual's complete satisfaction, whether it's a neighbor dispute or what have you. And those type of claims or complaints, when somebody says, we're going to sue you, or, they're unhappy with their water bill because they don't think it should be as high as it is, we're going to sue you. I would hate to have to sit around at every board meeting in the future and basically get into what we pay our department heads to resolve. So if the policy means that I have some discretion, or future supervisors, superintendents, or have discretion to say that, this is, nothing more than somebody, angry today, then, that's good. So I guess, material information hopefully allows for some flexibility there. That's why you don't have robots in these positions of department heads or in supervisor, because there has to be discretion as far as what moves up the ladder. And so I guess, if it looks like it is going to become a lawsuit or a potential for one, or there may be situations that aren't even lawsuits that may end up being issues that we need to deal with as a board privately, those need to be communicated to our township attorney, because there may be situations that aren't lawsuits that are just as critical. And so I think that's where discretion comes in. So I'll look it over a little bit more by Thursday, but that material information, I think, gives some wiggle room there. And then there's some timing things I want to look at too. So in terms of within 24 hours, what have you, it needs to be reported. Most of the time, as soon as we get notified, as soon as I see it in the email, it's going to the attorneys or to the insurance company or both. So those are just a couple of my quick concerns. Anybody else have anything they want to bring up on that issue? Okay. Thank you. Next item on the agenda for Thursday will be item I. The board will consider a motion, if we can bring Patrick up. The board will consider a motion for approval for the purchase of a 2021 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD work truck. My deal, I guess is what it is. It has a contact number through Berger Chevrolet for the price of $30,694 and plow and accessory fitting, I guess, for my deal contract, and has the number through NAPI for $9,901.15. The Parks and Recreation millage funds would be used for this purchase. We have Mr. Linehan on the call, and I'd like him see Mr. Massey with his hand up. We'll ask Mr. Massey, and then we'll go to Mr. Linehan for an explanation. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If I'm incorrect, please correct me. It seems like this is not the first time we're faced with something of this nature. May not be purchasing a truck, but it seems like we asked before, what's in the budget?
We're going to cover that. Yep, we'll cover that. We will cover that. Let's let Mr. Linehan talk a little bit about the purchase, and we'll cover about the budget and where we're at with that with the Parks and Rec. Okay? Thank you, Mr. Massey. We'll make sure we address that before we close this item. Mr. Linehan?
Thank you, Supervisor Bennett. This is an emergency purchase. We do have the money in the budget. Right now, we're working on some engineering costs for some current projects. So, we'll just have to make those adjustments accordingly for the truck. Right now, there aren't any surplus plow trucks and that. So, right now, we are kind of have our hands tied at this point where we can't necessarily put it off through the winter time.
So just to back up, Mr. Linehan, the truck that you have now was deemed to be unusable. Is that what?
Yep. The mechanics red tagged it. Had some broken motor mounts, and the suspension was going out on it. That vehicle has been sold at auction, so that money will be recouped back by the department because it was a department purchased vehicle.
So what is the truck used for the public and the board? What kinds of things?
This will be a truck that will be assigned directly to our full-time staff at the park, and it is outfitted with a plow for plowing operations of the park and the senior center in the wintertime.
So plowing, but also it's being outfitted with, I noticed some equipment that looks like it'll hold tools from Napite or something.
Yep.
Looks like a utility truck.
Yep. It's we're getting some toolboxes for it. We're also getting the back rack to hold the light, the emergency lights and that on it.
So basically, what do you have out there right now for maintenance as far as trucks go?
We have a Loaner Colorado, which is coming back to the township. We've got a truck for seasonal use and a truck right now that the full-time are sharing.
Okay. And so as far as where the money is coming from, this is coming from the millage, not from our general fund. And it was in the capital budget to purchase a truck eventually?
We had a truck purchase for next year, but had to move it up, so we have a plow truck for this year.
Okay, but we have a couple other capital projects that we're holding off on right now.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Massey, and then Mr.
My
Mansell.
question to the director, Patrick. Patrick, I have a question for you. You say you sold a truck in the auction?
Yes.
Did you bring that sale prior to the sale? Did you bring it to the board?
That is something that DPW and the mechanics deal with. So I'm not sure on that question.
I don't recall that coming before the board. So if it didn't come before the board, that was the decision you made to go around the board.
Well, before we start throwing accusations, let's clarify something.
Mr. Chair.
Let me finish, Mr. Massey. I do not want accusations made about our staff.
I'm not throwing no accusation.
Let me speak. Mr. Guzak, when we put a vehicle up for auction, what is the process for that? As treasurer, do you know the steps are for that?
I don't know all the steps, but I know that Steve sends an email out, and I think it goes to all the board members and says, okay, this truck is going up for auction, and it lists the pictures, it lists the amount that it doesn't list the amount that we want, but it does have a minimum amount, but he has a good idea of what it should sell for, and of course, if Steve puts it on the auction, there's a good reason for it. He wouldn't do it unless it was necessary. So I believe I saw that go through, but I see a lot of them, but I know Steve sends those emails out anytime there's anything being sold by the township. And that the other procedure, I don't know. I think it might go through DPW because Steve does report to Jeff Sears. So Jeff might be able to comment on the rest of the procedure, but I have seen it occur.
Okay. So we can verify on Thursday what process was for taking care of putting that vehicle up for auction.
Well, Jeff isn't here then?
Yeah, I don't know if he's still on, but we can check and see if he has that information at his fingertips. I doubt, but we have Mr. I'll get back to you, Mr. Massey, but we have Mr. Mansour, and then I think, did I see Mr. Atkins' hand up? I'm not sure. Okay, so Mr. Mansour?
Yep, so just a quick question here. The $9,900 for the plow plus the other stuff, does that include installation on the truck?
Yes, yep. And that is off the state bid price list. So both with Berger and Napide, those are competitively bid.
By the state, through my deal. Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, mine is unrelated to the vehicle sale. But first, I'd like to say, Patrick, I think you're doing a really good job, and I'm glad you're on board. And second of all, are there any updates in terms of the damage that was done at the fields? Has anybody been brought to justice, I guess, or any
restitution?
Yeah, insurance. I don't know if insurance covers that or.
Right.
Yeah, so it will be going up to insurance. There is some discretion with the detectives on it, thanks to a couple reports from the public. One of which a board member's relative gave us a video that was extremely helpful because while that wasn't the incident that caused the damage later on, one of those vehicles did actually come back and cause the damage. So that was extremely helpful. Both individuals from the first video will be doing community service with the township at the park itself. So one individual is doing 30 hours of community service to our satisfaction, and the other is doing 10 hours of community service to our satisfaction. If it's not done to our satisfaction, misdemeanor charges will be brought.
Okay. We do have Mr. Sears on the line. Mr. Sears, I don't know if you have the information available, but in terms of the auction of the previous park vehicle that was deemed red tagged, unable to be used, do you know the disposition of that vehicle?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information in front of me. And if that one did slip by the board, I apologize. My mechanics do handle the sale of that equipment. Generally, how we handle that is whenever we have vehicles for sale, we do bring it to the board to declare it surplus equipment. And then once it's declared surplus equipment, we put it on Gov Deals for sale. And if that did not happen, I apologize on behalf of my department, because that would have been my responsibility. And that may be something that, I just slipped up on through the COVID stuff. I'm not exactly sure when it was sold because we do, go through vehicles. So I can definitely get that information. I can get you how much it was sold for and when it was sold, and I can have that to you on Thursday for sure.
Yeah. And if it came to the board or not, that'd be great.
Absolutely, no problem.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Sears. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I thank Mr. Sears for his comments. At least he's being honest, because the reason I am so concerned about it is because we hold Chief Cadet and Chief Wise to the fire. So when they get ready to make moves like that. So I want to make sure that all the moves in regard to putting something on the auction block is done the same way. And everybody knows what the procedure is.
And I'm not certain that we have a formal policy and procedure for that, so that may be something we want to look at in the future for sure.
Yeah, but we've always done it.
Yeah, but it might be helpful to have something
Well,
in writing as a guide.
Yep, I agree. We need to make sure we have, set policy on how we deal with it if we don't have one. But let's take a look at what transpired, and then we'll go from there. But if it was red tagged, it probably is not very useful to anybody, but from the sounds of it. So we will take that up for decision on Thursday then. Patrick, thanks for bringing that to us, and we're glad that. So it sounds like the field is being repaired that was damaged.
Yeah. The one thing that we're going to see is once we get a Harley rake in there and get everything leveled off, and that it's going to be unusable for a little while until we can get the turf reestablished. So right now with things being slow in that, it's a good time for it. A lot better than if this was a regular summer and we were running programs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair, I would like to ask the Director Patrick, who did the inspection of the vehicle?
The township mechanics.
Is that the mechanics that normally works for Mr. Sears?
Yes.
So at that time at the time the inspection was done, they found no bad components on the vehicle.
No, they did, and then they red tagged it and took it out of service.
Yeah, the motor mounts.
It was the DPW mechanics, which we use for our vehicles, that it came in for an issue. They went over the vehicle and deemed it unsafe and took it out of service at that point.
So, Mr. Huzak?
Yeah, I just had a question for Patrick. If he has an estimate of what that total damage is going to be on those fields, because I know there's, just to repair it, but then there's loss of income because you can't use the fields. And I think he mentioned the first time they wouldn't have to have those tournaments were going to be delayed.
Right. Well, that tournament ended up getting canceled.
Oh, good.
And we were making arrangements to make a temporary field on field 6. So, we didn't see any loss of revenue on that. We're looking at right now probably, about $1,500 is what it's going to cost to get it back up.
So I'm not sure it even meets the deductible.
Repair it?
Yeah.
But then it can't be used for what, 6 months or what?
It just depends on how long it takes the grass to get established, but I think 6 months would be a good time frame.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay. In terms of the agenda, that future items, we got Thursday's meeting. Mr. Mansour? You need to unmute yourself.
So, yep. So if we're past that, I do have some questions on the written reports.
Yes. Which one?
Okay,
Go
if I
ahead.
start?
Yep, go. Which one do you want to start with?
All right, I want to start with just a quick one to the fire department, Chief Burdett.
Chief Burdett online? We'll bring Chief Burdett on.
Go right ahead, Mr. Mansour.
So, Chief, I'm looking at the loss reports, and it looked like for April and May that they were significantly less year over year. 20 versus 19, probably due to COVID implications or stuff like that. But then it looks like they recover in a bad way to previous year levels in June and July. And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about what's going on there. I know it's a mixture of just calls for stuff and legitimate emergencies and things. But I just want to know if you had any thoughts about that.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correct, Mr. Mansour. You're asking about the loss save percentages. Is that correct? Property loss and save?
Well, it's more along the number of incidents
the number of incidents
that occur. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'd have to do some research on them, but during the COVID, our call volume did drop slightly. Yep. I mean, it wasn't huge, but we did drop maybe 10, 15 incidents per month. But I can research that and get an email over to you and better explanation on it.
Yeah, that'd be great. It just looks like whatever the good thing was happening in the first April, May, it looks like we kind of reversed course. So just wondering if there's any more detail behind it. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing right off the top of my head right now is, and I know Chief Wiles will echo the sentiments on this, the roadways are a lot more congested, and we're having a lot more traffic accidents. Just this afternoon, we had a bad accident in McCandless and Saginaw where we had to cut some people out of the car. So we've seen an increase in that, but I'll give more information for you.
Thank you.
And,
you're welcome.
And one of the other things I've seen our police and fire, it seems as though maybe some of the rerouting of the traffic has caused some different traffic patterns and some accidents too. That I've seen several in the same place in the course of even a week. So.
True.
So
go ahead, Mr. Mansour.
If I could continue on, yeah. So getting to the Department of Public Works. There was just a mention in the write-up on Grand Wailea. It was just maybe just a typo or something in there. I just wanted to make sure. It says something about in the paragraph. It says will not go through funding. Will not go through funding, and I think what it was meant to say is that with the road, it will now go for funding. Is that?
I think you're right, Trustee Mansour. I think it's probably a typo.
Okay.
I apologize. I don't have my board report right in front of me, but I can confirm that or revise it for you.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay, no problem.
Yep. Can I move into Parks and Rec?
Sure.
Yep. So thank you. So I was just reading that, and Director Linehan. I think I read there that we had the 90-team Fire Sticks tournament come through this year, and somehow managed to get that accomplished with all the COVID stuff. Pretty good work for the group and the team there. So that was great to see.
One of the things, just Mr. Mansour.
I had here. What's that?
Just a clarification, and Patrick can expound on this if you care to, but depending on the sport determines whether or not they're able to hold their tournament. So softball was determined to be a lower risk than, say, lacrosse. And so based on the risk factor in the county health department is determining some of our fate here.
Yeah, which that's correct. The lacrosse tournament that the treasurer had reported to earlier, that week we got a call from the health department saying that we couldn't have it. So.
Okay, so the other question I have is wasn't it mentioned in the report here, but there was some time ago that we made some kind of changes on the status of the dog park licensing fees, requirements, that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering what the current situation there is, if we've gone back to our original approach of opening the dog park to people that have the right. That the pets have the right amount of vaccinations, et cetera, or what is the situation with that?
We haven't revisited right now. It's on the list for this winter when we start to go through, some of the policies and fee structures.
I believe there is a group holding a fundraiser for it, right, coming up?
There was a work day last weekend. The dog park has seen a little bit of an increase this summer as far as attendance goes, but it hasn't been a drastic increase.
So
Mr. Guzak?
So the fees have been eliminated, is that correct, Patrick? So now there's no fees at the dog park?
Correct. Shortly before I came on, they eliminated the fees, and then Attorney Laddie refunded any of those fees that were delivered.
So that way it's open to anyone that wants to go to that park. Anybody that's in the township or outside the township can use it at no cost, right?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that our residents knew that.
Mr. Laddie and then Mr. Massey.
Although I love dogs and dog owners, I didn't refund the money personally. I did it on behalf of the Township Parks and Rec department activities when we were a joint Parks and Rec. And so there have been, by the way, there have been a number of invoices and reconciliations that have had to take place for bills or services that were incurred or refunds that were incurred when we were a joint Parks and Rec Commission. And I, along with Brad Hester, am a signatory on those accounts. So Mr. Linehan is correct that I did issue those refunds through the accounts at signatory for the Parks and Rec Commission and their current existing accounts. And I don't want to get us off topic too much, but we are still in the process of unwinding ourselves from the city and township Parks and Recreation Commission. And upon the advice of our auditors at Plant Moran, they said that we don't want to rush into getting a final audit because things like this and other invoices or obligations, to use their term, have a pretty long tail. And so we're still in the process of trying to get, we did a fair amount of refunds this spring. We've had a few invoices that have come in for the period of time when we're the Joint Parks and Rec Commission. And I think that's dwindling down significantly, although from time to time, Mr. Linehan and I have to put on my Parks and Rec Commission signatory hat, and we have to exchange some funds. But it hasn't been anything necessarily significant. And while we're on the topic, I'm happy to give the board a thumbnail report of the status of those accounts and what's been paid out since January 1st. And I'm also happy to provide that to the city too, because remember, this is joint city township money. So sorry to interrupt. I just thought I'd better clarify that so that.
That'd probably be good to have a report on that, Mr. Light, at some point. So, did I see another hand up before we move on? Mr. Massey? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Linehan. And Mr. Linehan, did I understand you to say that those fees were eliminated before you came on board?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, we've anything else in the reports, Mr. Mansur, that you want to cover? No? Okay. With that, we will go back to our our Tuesday agenda for this evening, which is pretty much wrapped up. And I'll take a motion to adjourn, and we'll see everybody back on Thursday.
I so move.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I so move.
Okay, there's motion and support. Ms. Lane? Everybody want to unmute yourself so that you can do a roll call vote. Ms. Lane? Ms. Lane, you want to go?
Mr. Guzak,
Yes.
Mr. Mansour,
Yes.
Mr. Atkins,
Yes.
Mr. Massey,
Yes.
myself, yes, Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
and Mr. Thomas is absent.
All right. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
We'll see you on Thursday.
Good night.
All right, good night.
Good night.